It's an unfair system, and I hope the Supreme Court finds it unconstitutional one day and one day soon. Most of the proponents of this system call it affirmative action. I'm going to call it by its rightful name, which is racial preferences. So when you hear me say racial preferences in this conversation, I mean affirmative action. And in some ways, you know, Chinese Americans are caught in a bind because you have the left that thinks that this is right, that this should happen to you, and then you have other people who confuse this with students from China. You know, a friend of mine said to me, "What are you talking about? I was just in Harvard, and there were busloads of Chinese students arriving." I said, "Well, they're probably from the PRC. These are students studying abroad." Once somebody becomes an American, either because he's born here or she's born here or because they naturalized, they're American. And an American deserves to be treated as an American. It's plain and simple. That there's no nuance here. So we create a lot of problems when we categorize, especially when the government categorizes. I agree with Justice Scalia here when he said this in the case Adron versus Pena, that we create mischief for the future. So throughout my career, I've been speaking against these categories. What do I mean by categories? Asian Americans is one category. You know very well there are many differences between Indian Americans and Chinese Americans and Laotian Americans and Filipino Americans. The cultural indicators are very different. The household income is very different. The mortality rate is very different. These are all very recent. Even the term minority, the way we use it today, is very recent. You know, in Madison's day and George Washington's day, minority meant an ideological minority. And then later in the 19th century and the early 20th century, a minority was the European minorities in the Habsburg Empire, in the Ottoman Empire, and the Russian Empire. It was not until 1961, a year after I was born, that minorities came to have the definition it has today. So when people have talked about diversity here, they've been right. My predecessors in speaking in this book about diversity, when we talk about diversity, and I was speaking to my children last night about how can you be against diversity, you know, as Yates said, it institutionalizes racism. It's about group proportionalism. What is group proportionalism? Group proportionalism is the idea that in a classroom or a legislature or an office, people should mirror their percentage and proportion in the base population. And that is very difficult to arrive at without coercion. And I definitely agree with what Scalia said here. In the eyes of government, we should be all one race, and that is American. Now, I said to you how these categories for Asian Americans make no sense. It makes even less sense for Hispanics. Hispanics, which is a category created very recently, by the way. It was created in 1977 by a directive from the Office of Management and Budget. It's all residents with ancestry in this country. But this category makes very little sense culturally or from any scientific perspective. This man, David Ortiz, Bobby Ortiz, for the outfield here in this town for the Boston Red Sox, he's Hispanic. You might know her. Cameron Diaz, she's Hispanic. Bruce Chen, from Panama, played for the Kansas City Royals, also Hispanic. And George Lopez is Hispanic. So, what am I saying here? All of the races in the world fall under this umbrella of Hispanics, right? And yet, the government, and this has real life consequences in our lives, the government says that somebody who is deemed to be Hispanic, his or her daughter should have an advantage over somebody who is of Chinese origin, even if the Hispanic, quote unquote, is the son or daughter of a lawyer or a doctor or a scientist, and the son or daughter of a Chinese American is the son or daughter of a laborer, somebody who works in a factory. So, you know, this makes, as you can see, very little sense. Somebody talked about turkeys voting for Thanksgiving. What I use is the Stockholm Syndrome. The Stockholm Syndrome derives its name from a robbery in Stockholm, Sweden in 1974. 4 people were held hostage. They ended up developing a feeling for the hostage taker. in sympathy for him. And they refused to testify at his trial, at the Hostage-Taker's trial, and then they waste money for him. But Chinese Americans are not the only ones who suffer from this system. You know, Asian Americans are 5.6% of the population, Chinese Americans even less. The system really harms all of society. Let's consider how we got here. The first major case is the case known as the Regents of the University of California, Davis versus Bakke, known as the Bakke case, in which the Supreme Court held that diversity, that word again, was sufficiently compelling for race to be considered for admissions. Then another case, which was very important, was Grutter, where the quote held that, quote unquote, there are educational benefits that flow from an ethnically diverse student body, quote unquote, and that represents a compelling state interest that justifies the use of race in admissions. So let's go back to that when I talked about group proportionalism. If proportionalism means that an office or a legislature or a class should mirror society, if your group is 5.6% of the population, which is the case for Asian Americans, once you get out of whack with that, it's not a very diverse student body. So an Asian student body at USC of 50%, UC San Diego or UC Irvine is not very diverse, and 43% at Harvard is not very diverse. And yet, we know from a Harvard study from 2013, Harvard itself said that if only SAT scores and only GPA were used, Asian Americans would reach about 43% of the student body. So, but let's go back. You talked about principles, discussing principles. What does it mean that there are educational benefits to be had from a diverse student body? It means, it's actually, once you deconstruct it, it's a very anti-rationalist, anti-enlightenment idea. It means there's racial knowledge, there's ethnic knowledge. And that is epistemic or factual relativism. It means there's no objective truth. It means that I, for example, have perspectives and knowledge that I bring from my ethnicity, my DNA, and so do you. We are there to teach our lived experience, and we have racial knowledge that come with our DNA. That is a very dangerous notion, and is a very anti-enlightenment and anti-American notion, actually, I could say that. Especially because these groups were confected by bureaucrats. Asian Americans were confected by bureaucrats, Hispanics, Pacific Islanders. There was going to be another one for MENA, Middle East, North Africa, until President Trump put a stop to it earlier this year. Now, the people who created these groups, a lot of them have good intentions. We should not impugn their motives. But nearly all, and I have looked at this, nearly all were influenced by theories that came out of Europe in the mid-20th century, and were an attempt to smash the narratives that existed, the narratives of the Enlightenment, of the idea that we're all born equal, with free and equal in this condition that we share with all of humanity. That's the modern view. The other view is the postmodern view. The postmodernists and the critical theorists thought that was all wrong, and that got in the way. That was all, that truth did not matter, truth did not mean anything, that truth was a bunch of language games, and was constructed to keep the oppressor class in place. And only monolithic groups, collectives, would be able to emancipate the marginalized and create a counter-narrative. Now, what is interesting about the Harvard case is that it smashes all of that. It gets rid of all that. Asian Americans, with a great GPA and a great SAT scores, do experience discrimination. Chinese Americans tell me this all the time. Indian Americans are, very cruelly treated sometimes with jokes about Apu from The Simpsons, and yet they succeed. And we'll get to that later. But it smashes this idea, this postmodernist idea, that there's an oppressor class and a bunch of subservient classes that cannot succeed because of the structure of the American system. And by the way, at the same time that postmodernism was emerging in Europe and in France and Germany, Mao, in China was creating the red categories and the black categories, which are really stemmed from the same idea. You know, the red categories, I guess, were the farmers, and the black categories were supposed capitalist rulers, and people who were born into these categories had advantages or disadvantages that had nothing to do with what they had. A Chinese American woman said to me, you know, I came to this country to get rid of all that, to get away from all that. And here I come into government categories, and people having benefits of being penalized as a consequence of being born into these categories. So all of these woolly ideas. By the way, the man who created the term Asian American in the 60s, I forget his name now, he was a Maoist. He was an American from Berkeley, of course, who was influenced by Mao. But the proponents of racial preference would say, well, you know, it's only one element, the plus factor. It's a holistic approach. But holistic is a nice Greek word that means everything taken in. And one of those things is race, which means race is a deciding factor. But look at what this does. So it harms Chinese Americans. We know that, you know that. You don't need me here to tell you that. Let's look what it does to the people in whose name has been directed, right? There's three harms at least, there are many others. One is mismatch theory. That's the theory that if you have not been in a competitive environment, K through 12, all of a sudden you're thrusted into a competitive environment at an elite school, you're not going to perform well, you're not going to compete, you're going to get really frustrated, you're going to drop out, you're going to change your major, so there are fewer doctors, fewer scientists, fewer lawyers from your given category. The second one is earned success. Let's not kid ourselves. If you get into Harvard or Princeton or Yale or any competitive school, Chicago as well, Stanford doesn't have to be an Ivy, and you come from one of the groups that is protected, you're going to have a stigma for the rest of the day. There are people who are going to say, who are going to think, not everybody will. There are some people who are going to say, you know, you only got into Princeton because of your last name. And this is really going to bother you if you worked your butt off, if you didn't watch TV, if you didn't party, if you did your homework, and you deserve your place at Harvard, and somebody's questioning it because of who you are. This is going to be really offensive to you, the fact that this stigma is attached to it. And if you believe it yourself, it's even worse because we know from all the data that you only enjoy the things that you earn through your own success. If you have a shiny red car, you enjoy it if you earned it. If your mother gave you money, you really don't enjoy that much. And if you earn the lottery, you don't enjoy that much. There's a component to earn success about the things we have and enjoy. And there's the last one, which is group spokesman. I already talked about that you're seen, if there's a benefit to be derived from your presence in the classroom, you're seen as a spokesman of your group. What if you're an individual and you don't feel like speaking for your group, you're not an ambassador for your group, you're still expected to. And there's every expectation that you should speak for your group. So, what causes success in America? You know, let's get down to the real reasons people succeed in America. And I'm not saying racism does not exist. There are evil people. We're not going to be able to get rid of evil people. But is that what really holds people down? As I said, Chinese Americans and Indian Americans face discrimination sometimes, yet they're able to succeed. So what accounts for that? Well, these are data from the Center for Disease Control. This is the out-of-wedlock birth, the unmarried birth, the kids who are born to unmarried mothers. As you can see, Asian Americans is extremely low. Sadly, the other groups are all very high. The divorce rate for women, ages 35 to 39. By the way, this is all the same across all the age cohorts, but I didn't want to have like 6 slides, so I just picked this one being, you know, where women have a lot of children at this age. As you can see, again, Asian Americans do not get divorced at the same rate as the other groups. Again, it's a sad statistic, but it's true. And this is the number of kids growing in a household where the parents are married. And you can see very high for Asian Americans and very low for the others. By the way, let me go back to the other slide because you will see that next to Asians, the divorce rate is lowest among the column there on the right, and that's the Hispanics who were born overseas. So there's a component here. I'm getting booted out here, so let me just go back. And when your parents are in the house, what do? You do more homework because your mom and your dad put pressure on you. And look at the number of hours for Asian American kids spend a week doing homework. Look at the dropout rate, much lower. So, look, oh, if you've taken photos, I'll put that slide back on. Look, a lot of you are immigrants. I'm an immigrant. We are lucky to live in a country where there's discrimination. You know, there's discrimination everywhere. There's discrimination in China, there's discrimination in the country I was born in, Cuba. There's discrimination everywhere. But in this country, if you work, you play by the rules, there's a good chance you're going to succeed. And you're going to be able to overcome the discrimination. I really want to thank you for what you're doing, because you're helping. It will be cosmic retribution if people who suffered because of the Maoist categories end up changing America for the better and get rid of our government categories. Thank you very much.